No witness, no crime. Officer Ryan Keller said with a crooked grin as rainwater rolled down the brim of his police cap and splashed onto the cracked sidewalk beneath his boots. The ATM camera above him blinked red through the storm, barely visible through the curtain of freezing October rain sweeping across the south side of Chicago. In front of him stood Evelyn Carter, 72 years old, barely 5 feet tall, her gray wool coat soaked dark from the weather, one trembling hand gripping the metal handle of her grocery cart, while the other clutched a wrinkled bank envelope against her chest like it was the last fragile thing keeping her upright. The fluorescent glow from the liquor store nearby painted the street in pale yellow reflections, turning puddles into broken mirrors. Traffic hissed past in the distance. Nobody stopped. Nobody looked twice. Blake Morton stepped closer beside his partner, broad shoulders blocking the weak light from the ATM vestibule. His leather gloves creaked as he snatched the envelope from Evelyn's hands. The old woman gasped softly, more startled than angry, her eyes widening behind fogged glasses. "Please," she said quietly. "That money's for my granddaughter's surgery." Blake opened the envelope anyway, peeling back the damp paper while loose bills fluttered slightly in the cold wind. $840, he muttered. "That's a lot of cash for somebody living off church donations." Ryan chuckled under his breath. "Funny how that works." Evelyn swallowed hard. Raindrops slid down the deep lines in her face, though it was impossible to tell where the rain ended and humiliation began. Around them, people waiting at the bus stop lowered their eyes toward their phones. A man across the street pretended to smoke while watching from beneath the awning of a laundromat. Nobody wanted trouble with police. Especially not here. Especially not tonight. Evelyn tried once more, her voice barely louder than the rain. "Sir, my granddaughter's operation is Monday morning." Ryan stepped closer until the smell of coffee and wet fabric filled the narrow space between them. "Then maybe pray harder," he replied coldly. The words hung in the air heavier than the storm itself. Evelyn looked down slowly at her shaking hands. Arthritis had twisted her fingers over the years, but tonight they trembled for another reason entirely. She had spent 6 months collecting that money, cleaning church pews before sunrise, folding donated clothes at the shelter, skipping meals she never mentioned to anyone. Every dollar had a purpose. Every dollar belonged to a little girl waiting in a hospital bed 3 miles away. Blake folded the cash and slipped it into his own jacket pocket with casual ease, like he'd done this before. Maybe many times before. "You should head home, ma'am," he said. "Weather's getting dangerous." A small sound escaped Evelyn's throat then. Not anger, not fear, just exhaustion. The kind that settles into a person after surviving too many winters alone. Slowly, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out an old silver flip phone with scratches across the screen. Ryan noticed instantly. "Who you calling?" he asked. Evelyn didn't answer at first. She pressed one button carefully with her thumb while rain tapped softly against the plastic shell. Her voice, when it came, sounded smaller than the storm around her. "My son." Blake laughed immediately. "Your son?" Ryan smirked. "What's he gonna do? Write us a complaint letter?" But Evelyn's eyes never left the phone pressed against her ear. Somewhere far away, beyond the rain, beyond Chicago, beyond the silence swallowing this street whole, the call began to ring. And for the first time that night, something shifted in the air. The rain kept falling long after the police cruiser disappeared around the corner, its taillights dissolving into the wet Chicago night like 2 fading embers. Evelyn Carter remained standing beneath the flickering bus stop light with the old phone still pressed against her ear, listening to the empty ringing on the other end. Nobody answered. Slowly, she lowered the phone and stared at the dark screen for several seconds before closing it with a soft click. The sound felt strangely loud against the silence around her. Across the street, the laundromat owner pulled down his metal security gate with a rattling crash. A city bus groaned past without stopping, spraying cold water across the curb. Evelyn adjusted the scarf around her neck and wrapped both trembling hands around the handle of her grocery cart. The wheels squeaked softly as she began walking down Madison Street alone. Her apartment building stood nearly 6 blocks away, above an old pawn shop with cracked windows and faded lottery signs taped crooked against the glass. The elevator had not worked in almost 3 years, so she climbed the stairs slowly, one careful step at a time, her breathing shallow by the second floor. The hallway smelled faintly of dust, old radiator heat, and somebody's burnt dinner from earlier that evening. Apartment 2B waited at the far end beneath a buzzing fluorescent light. Evelyn unlocked the door quietly and stepped inside. The apartment was small but warm. Floral curtains hung beside the kitchen window. Framed church photographs lined the walls beside faded pictures of birthdays, graduations, and family reunions from decades ago. A pot of soup still rested on the stove untouched. On the coffee table near the couch sat a little pink backpack covered in cartoon stars. Beside it rested a folded hospital brochure. Pediatric Cardiac Center. Monday, 8 a.m. Evelyn removed her soaked coat carefully and hung it beside the door before lowering herself into a chair with a tired sigh. Her knees ached from the cold. Across the room, a little girl no older than 8 sat sleeping beneath a blanket on the couch, curly hair spilling across the pillow while the television flickered silently in front of her. Kayla, Evelyn's granddaughter. Her tiny chest rose and fell steadily for now, though every breath still carried the faint whistle doctors had warned about months earlier. Evelyn reached over and gently brushed a loose curl from the child's forehead. Her fingers lingered there a moment longer than usual. "You are going to be okay, baby," she whispered softly, though tonight the words felt heavier than ever before. The answering machine near the kitchen suddenly beeped once. Evelyn looked up quickly. One new message. She stood and pressed the button with shaking fingers. Static crackled through. The speaker first, followed by the low hum of what sounded like an airplane cabin somewhere far away. Then came a man's calm voice. "Mom." Evelyn closed her eyes instantly at the sound. Deep, controlled, familiar. "I landed 30 minutes ago and saw your missed call. Call me back when you hear this." A brief pause followed. "And Mom, if something is wrong, do not protect anybody from me." The message ended with another soft click. Evelyn stared at the machine silently while rain tapped against the kitchen window behind her. Somewhere beyond the city skyline, thunder rolled low across Lake Michigan. On the wall beside the refrigerator hung an old photograph inside a silver frame. A younger Evelyn stood smiling beside a tall black man in military uniform, his broad shoulders straight, dark eyes serious even then. Marcus Carter. 20 years ago. Before the medals. Before the government contracts. Before entire rooms learned to go silent when his name entered the conversation. Evelyn looked at the photograph for a long moment before reaching slowly for the phone again. At that exact moment, nearly 1,000 miles away, Marcus Carter sat alone inside a private terminal overlooking a rain-covered runway outside Washington, D.C. A midnight light reflected across the polished black table in front of him, while giant windows trembled softly beneath distant thunder. 3 men in tailored suits waited silently near the door, careful not to interrupt the stillness surrounding him. On the wall behind Marcus, multiple security monitors glowed with satellite feeds, airport surveillance, and scrolling intelligence reports from cities across the country. Yet none of it held his attention now. His phone rested motionless beside a half-finished cup of black coffee. The voicemail from his mother had already replayed 4 times. Marcus leaned back slowly in his chair, one hand brushing against the silver military watch around his wrist. His expression barely changed, but something colder settled behind his eyes with every passing second. The room itself seemed to feel it. One of the suited men finally cleared his throat carefully. "Sir, the Zurich conference call is waiting." Marcus never looked up. "Cancel it." The man hesitated. "Sir, they flew in from—" I said cancel it. Quiet returned instantly. Outside, lightning flashed beyond the runway, illuminating the sharp lines of Marcus's face for only a moment before darkness swallowed the glass again. He looked nothing like the man smiling in the old photograph hanging in Evelyn's apartment. Time had hardened him. His shoulders carried the stillness of someone trained to survive dangerous places without warning. There was no wasted movement in him anymore. No nervousness. No uncertainty. Only control. Marcus picked up the phone again and listened carefully to the background noise beneath his mother's message. Rain. Traffic. A bus engine somewhere nearby. Then another sound. Faint. Male voices. He replayed it once more. This time his eyes narrowed slightly. Zoomed the audio. One of the men moved quickly to a nearby workstation, fingers flying across the keyboard while static crackled through hidden speakers overhead. The sound sharpened little by little until a sentence finally emerged beneath the rain. Then maybe pray harder. The room went completely still. Marcus did not blink. Across the terminal, another man shifted uneasily beneath the pressure suddenly filling the air. Trace the location, Marcus said quietly. Already running, came the answer. A few seconds later, a map appeared on the nearest monitor. Madison Street, South Side Chicago. Marcus stared at the screen in silence. Then he stood. The movement alone changed the entire room. Every man near the door straightened instinctively. One reached for his phone immediately. Another grabbed a folder from the table without being told. Marcus slipped on his dark overcoat slowly, the fabric settling across his broad frame with quiet precision. "Get the jet ready," he said. "Sir, weather conditions over Chicago are getting worse." Marcus picked up the photograph resting beside the monitor. It showed Kayla smiling from a hospital bed while Evelyn sat beside her holding a paper cup of pudding. The corners of the photo were worn from being handled too often. Marcus studied it for one long second before sliding it carefully into his coat pocket. "I am aware of the weather," he replied calmly. Nobody spoke again after that. Outside, engines roared awake against the storm while rain streaked across the runway lights in silver lines. And somewhere beneath the same dark sky, two police officers still believed they had robbed an invisible old woman with nobody powerful enough to care. The storm over Chicago grew heavier just before dawn, turning the city streets silver beneath the flashing reflections of traffic lights and storefront signs. Inside the 12th District Police Station, Officer Ryan Keller leaned back in his chair with his boots resting against the edge of a cluttered desk while stale coffee cooled beside a stack of unfinished reports. The bullpen smelled like burnt paper, damp uniforms, and old radiator heat. Somewhere down the hall, a television muttered morning headlines no one was listening to. Blake Morton stood near the vending machine, counting folded cash beneath the shadow of flickering fluorescent lights. "8:40, he muttered with a grin. "Not bad for 10 minutes of work." Ryan smirked without looking up from his phone. "Told you old folks always hide money somewhere." Blake slid the bills into his wallet casually before grabbing a candy bar from the machine. "You think she actually had a granddaughter in surgery?" Ryan shrugged. "Does it matter?" The words settled ugly into the stale air between them. Near the front desk, a younger officer named Daniel Ruiz glanced up briefly from his paperwork. His jaw tightened slightly, though he said nothing. He had heard enough stories about Keller and Morton since joining the department 6 months earlier. Stories about missing cash during searches, complaints that disappeared, witnesses who suddenly changed statements. Everybody knew. Nobody touched it. Ryan noticed Ruiz watching and smiled coldly. "Something on your mind, rookie?" Ruiz looked back down immediately. "No, sir." Ryan chuckled softly and returned to scrolling through his phone. Outside, thunder rolled low over the city skyline while rain streaked across the station windows in crooked silver lines. Then the front doors opened. A gust of cold wind swept through. The lobby first. Behind it entered Evelyn Carter. Her gray coat was still damp from the night before, though she had tried to press it neatly before leaving home. Kayla's pink backpack hung from one shoulder now, almost too bright against the exhaustion lining Evelyn's face. Every conversation inside the station seemed to quiet slightly as she approached the front desk. The old woman stood straighter than before despite the dark circles beneath her eyes. "I need to file a report," she said softly. Ruiz looked up carefully. "What kind of report, ma'am?" Evelyn hesitated only a second. "Against 2 officers." Across the room, Blake laughed under his breath without turning around. Ryan slowly lowered his feet from the desk. The atmosphere changed instantly. Heavy, watchful. Evelyn reached into her purse and removed a folded withdrawal receipt from the bank along with a handwritten surgery estimate from the hospital. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. "That money belonged to my granddaughter," she said. "And they took it." Blake walked closer, chewing lazily on the candy bar while rainwater dripped from his jacket onto the station floor. "You making accusations now?" he asked. Evelyn looked directly at him for the first time since the night before. "I am telling the truth." Ryan stood slowly beside his partner, broad shoulders blocking part of the overhead light. "Careful, ma'am," he said calmly. "False reports can become serious problems." But Evelyn did not lower her eyes. Somewhere deep beneath the fear, beneath the humiliation, something steadier had taken hold now. Maybe exhaustion. Maybe faith. Maybe simply the refusal to disappear quietly anymore. Ruiz glanced between them uneasily. Then the station phone near the front desk rang sharply through the silence. 1 ring. 2. 3. Ruiz answered quickly. 12th District. His expression changed almost instantly. Yes, sir, he said, suddenly sitting straighter. Right away, sir. Ryan frowned. What is it? Ruiz swallowed once before lowering the receiver slowly. There is a man downstairs asking for Mrs. Evelyn Carter. Blake smirked. And? Ruiz looked directly at Ryan this time. Sir, 6 black SUVs just pulled up outside. For a moment, nobody inside the station moved. Rain slid slowly down the front windows while the low growl of idling engines echoed from outside like distant thunder trapped against the curb. Officer Ryan Keller exchanged a quick glance with Blake Morton, the confidence in both men dimming slightly for the first time that morning. Ruiz stepped carefully toward the glass entrance doors and looked outside. His breath caught immediately. 6 identical black SUVs sat lined along the sidewalk beneath the flashing glow of the streetlights, their dark paint reflecting rainwater like polished stone. Every vehicle carried government plates. No logos. No markings. Just silence. Men in dark overcoats stood beside the doors with hands folded calmly in front of them, their posture too disciplined to mistake for private security. The station lobby suddenly felt smaller. Who the hell is this lady? Blake muttered under his breath. Evelyn said nothing. She simply tightened her grip on Kayla's backpack while the fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. Then the center SUV door opened. A tall black man stepped out slowly beneath the rain. No umbrella. No hurry. Water rolled down the shoulders of his charcoal coat, while polished black shoes crossed the flooded sidewalk without hesitation. Marcus Carter moved with the kind of stillness that made people notice him before he even spoke. His expression remained unreadable as he approached the station entrance, but the air around him carried a weight that reached the room several seconds before he did. Ryan straightened unconsciously. Blake stopped chewing. Ruiz opened the door halfway, unsure whether he should salute or step aside. Marcus entered without acknowledging anyone else first. His eyes found Evelyn immediately. The hardness in his face softened almost invisibly. Mom. Evelyn's shoulders dropped with relief the moment she saw him. Marcus. He crossed the lobby in 3 steady steps and gently took her cold hands into his own. You should not have come out in this weather, he said quietly. Evelyn tried to smile. Kayla needs the surgery. Marcus glanced toward the pink backpack hanging from her shoulder. Rainwater dripped from the edge of his coat onto the station floor. I know, he replied softly. Behind him, every officer in the room watched in complete silence now. Ryan finally stepped forward, forcing confidence back into his voice. Sir, I do not know who you are, but this is an active police matter. Marcus turned his head slowly toward him. Nothing in his expression changed. That somehow made it worse. Officer Keller, Marcus said calmly. Ryan froze. Marcus shifted his eyes toward Blake next. Officer Morton. Blake's jaw tightened. How do you know our names? Marcus ignored the question completely. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and removed Evelyn's crumpled bank receipt along with the hospital estimate folded beside it. $840, he said quietly. Withdrawn yesterday at 4:14 in the afternoon. Nobody answered. Marcus continued with the same steady tone. Pediatric cardiac procedure scheduled Monday morning at St. Mary's Children's Hospital. Ryan forced a laugh that sounded thinner than before. Listen, if your mother thinks somebody stole money, she can file paperwork like everybody else. Marcus looked at him for one long second. She already did. The lobby doors opened again behind him. 3 more men entered carrying slim black folders beneath their coats. One handed Marcus a tablet without speaking. Marcus glanced briefly at the screen before looking back toward Ryan. Your body camera was disabled for 12 minutes last night, he said. Ryan's face changed instantly. Marcus tilted the screen slightly. Unfortunately for you, the ATM camera across Madison Street was not. Silence crashed through the station. Even the television down the hallway seemed quieter now. Blake shifted uneasily. You threatening officers? Marcus stepped closer at last, not aggressive, not loud, just calm enough to make the room colder. No, he said softly. I am giving 2 men an opportunity to remember that my mother is not invisible. No one spoke after that. Rain continued tapping against the station windows in soft, uneven rhythms, while the fluorescent lights overhead hummed quietly like tired machinery. Officer Ryan Keller stood perfectly still near the front desk, but the confidence that once sat easily on his face had begun to crack around the edges. Blake Morton looked toward the lobby doors as though calculating the distance to the street outside. Marcus Carter noticed both reactions without appearing to notice anything at all. He simply handed the tablet back to the man beside him and turned toward his mother again. "Did you eat this morning?" he asked gently. Evelyn blinked, almost caught off guard by the softness in his voice after the cold tension filling the room. "Not yet," she admitted quietly. Marcus nodded once. "You should have something warm before we go to the hospital." Ryan frowned. "Hospital?" Marcus looked at him calmly. "My niece has surgery in 48 hours. The words landed differently now. Human. Personal. Suddenly, the old woman standing in the station no longer looked invisible. Ruiz glanced toward Evelyn again, noticing details he had missed before. The worn sleeves on her coat. The hospital bracelet peeking from Kayla's backpack pocket. The exhaustion hidden beneath her dignity. Marcus removed a folded handkerchief from his coat pocket and gently dried rainwater from Evelyn's hands the same way someone might handle fragile glass. The room watched in silence. Blake shifted uncomfortably. "Look," he muttered, trying to regain control of the moment. Maybe this whole thing got misunderstood. Marcus raised his eyes slowly toward him. "Misunderstood." Blake cleared his throat. "It was dark outside. We were responding to suspicious activity." Marcus tilted his head slightly, studying him. "An elderly woman withdrawing money for a child's surgery looked suspicious to you?" Blake opened his mouth, but no answer came immediately. Across the room, even Ryan avoided eye contact now. Marcus did not raise his voice. That somehow made every sentence sharper. "Do you know what my mother did for 37 years?" he asked quietly. Nobody answered. "She cleaned classrooms at St. Agnes Church School before sunrise every morning." Marcus glanced toward Evelyn briefly. "She packed lunches for children whose parents could not afford groceries." His eyes returned to the officers. "And she taught her son that a person's character is measured by how they treat people who cannot defend themselves." The station felt painfully still. Somewhere down the hallway, a printer clicked softly before falling silent again. Marcus reached into his inside coat pocket and removed a slim black wallet. He opened it carefully. Federal credentials gleamed beneath the fluorescent light. Not police. Not military. Something else. Something higher. Ruiz inhaled sharply under his breath. Ryan's face drained of color almost immediately. Blake looked from the credentials to Marcus as though seeing him clearly for the first time. "Wait," Ryan whispered. Marcus closed the wallet slowly. 20 years ago," he said calmly, "I led operations in places most people in this room cannot pronounce." Rain rolled down the station windows behind him like silver lines across glass. "I spent half my life hunting men who believed power gave them permission to humiliate weaker people." His voice remained low, controlled. "So believe me when I tell you this is not about the money anymore." Nobody moved. Nobody even seemed to breathe correctly. Evelyn looked at her son carefully then, noticing the faint shadows beneath his eyes, the exhaustion buried beneath all that discipline. For a brief moment, he no longer looked dangerous to her. He looked tired, just tired. She reached gently for his hand. Marcus looked down immediately. "Baby," Evelyn said softly, using the name she had called him since childhood. "Do not let anger make you cold." The words changed something in the room instantly. Marcus stood silent for several seconds while rain whispered against the windows behind him. Then slowly, almost reluctantly, the tension in his shoulders eased. He covered his mother's hand with his own and nodded once. And for the first time since entering the station, the storm surrounding him seemed to quiet. The silence inside the station finally broke when the front doors opened again and a gray-haired man in a dark overcoat stepped hurriedly into the lobby, rainwater glistening across his shoulders beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. Captain Harold. Bennett had spent 32 years inside the Chicago Police Department, and the deep lines across his face carried the weight of every one of them. The moment his eyes landed on Marcus Carter, he stopped walking entirely. For one brief second, something close to disbelief crossed his expression. Then came recognition. Real recognition. "Oh my God," Bennett muttered under his breath. Ryan Keller straightened immediately. "Captain, this guy is interfering with police procedure." Bennett ignored him completely. His eyes never left Marcus. Mr. Carter, he said carefully, almost respectfully. Marcus gave a small nod. Captain Bennett. The older man removed his wet gloves slowly, buying himself time to think. Around the station, officers exchanged uneasy glances. Nobody had ever heard their captains sound nervous before. Bennett stepped closer, lowering his voice. I did not know this involved your family. Marcus looked toward Evelyn standing quietly beside him. Most people never notice my family, he replied calmly. The words hit harder than shouting ever could. Bennett exhaled heavily. He turned toward Ryan and Blake with a look that immediately drained what little confidence remained in both men. Tell me exactly what happened last night. Ryan attempted a smile that collapsed halfway across his face. Captain, we responded to suspicious behavior near the ATM on Madison. Bennett did not blink. And somehow an elderly woman lost $840 during your investigation? Blake stepped in quickly. There could have been confusion during the search. Marcus tilted his head slightly. Interesting choice of words. Bennett rubbed one hand across his mouth before looking back toward Marcus again. I remember your name from overseas, he admitted quietly. Several younger officers nearby looked confused. Bennett noticed. 10 years ago, he said slowly, I still fixed on Marcus. There was an operation in Eastern Europe involving kidnapped diplomats and a private extraction team. Ruiz frowned slightly, trying to remember the story. Bennett continued. Only one team made it out alive. The room grew still once more. Rain whispered against the windows while distant sirens echoed somewhere far outside. The reports never used his full name, Bennett said softly. But everybody in federal law enforcement knew who led it. Blake swallowed hard. Ryan's jaw tightened. Bennett glanced toward them both with visible disappointment now. You two have any idea whose mother you humiliated? Marcus remained expressionless, but Ruiz noticed several of the men standing near the SUVs exchange brief looks of quiet caution. Not fear. Respect. The dangerous kind. Bennett lowered his voice further. There are people in Washington who do not wait politely when Marcus Carter gets involved in something. Right on cue, another black vehicle pulled up outside the station. This one carried official federal plates, clearly visible through the rain. Two men in dark suits stepped out carrying sealed folders. Ruiz watched Ryan notice them through the glass. The color disappeared from his face entirely. Marcus looked toward the window only briefly before returning his attention to Evelyn. Kayla should not be waiting alone much longer, he said gently. Evelyn nodded softly. She gets nervous in hospitals. Marcus adjusted the strap of the pink backpack on his shoulder with surprising care. The simple gesture felt almost strange against the heavy atmosphere surrounding him. Bennett watched quietly for a moment before speaking again. Mr. Carter, he said carefully. Internal affairs can handle this from here. Marcus finally looked directly at him. I am counting on that. Then his eyes shifted toward Ryan and Blake one last time. Calm. Controlled. Absolutely steady. Because if my mother had walked into this station alone today, he said softly, you would have buried her complaint beneath paperwork before lunch. Neither officer answered. They could not. The worst part was knowing he was right. The federal agents entered the station without raising their voices, yet the entire building seemed to shift around them the moment the sealed folders touched Captain Bennett's desk. Rain continued falling outside in slow silver sheets while morning lights struggled weakly through the clouds above Chicago. Officer Ryan Keller stood rigid. Beside the front counter now, his earlier swagger completely gone. Blake Morton avoided looking directly at anyone at all. One of the agents opened a folder carefully and slid several printed photographs across the desk. ATM surveillance stills. Timestamps. Clear angles. Bennett studied them silently, his jaw tightening deeper with every page. The evidence was undeniable. Marcus Carter remained near his mother without speaking. His attention stayed fixed on Evelyn as she adjusted Kayla's backpack against her shoulder. The little zipper shaped like a cartoon star had broken halfway off years ago, but Evelyn still carried it carefully like something precious. Marcus noticed her hands trembling again. You need to sit down, he said quietly. Evelyn shook her head softly. Not until this is finished. Her voice carried no anger now, only dignity. The kind built slowly over decades of surviving things nobody else notices. Bennett finally looked up from the photographs toward Ryan and Blake. Disappointment filled every line in his face. Turn in your badges, he said heavily. Neither officer moved at first. Blake swallowed hard. Captain, please. Bennett did not raise his voice. Now, Ryan slowly unclipped his badge from his uniform while the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The small metal shield landed against the desk with a sound far louder than it should have been. Blake followed a second later, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Ruiz watched quietly from nearby, something unsettled moving behind his expression. Perhaps shame. Perhaps realization. Marcus finally stepped forward then, not toward the officers, but toward the desk itself. He removed a plain white envelope from inside his coat and placed it beside the photographs. Bennett frowned slightly. "What is this?" $840. Marcus replied calmly. Ryan looked confused. Blake blinked twice. Marcus continued quietly. "My mother's money was returned to her account 30 minutes ago." Bennett stared at him. "Then why bring this?" Marcus glanced toward Evelyn. "Because she asked me to." The room fell silent again. Evelyn slowly stepped closer, her shoes making soft sounds against the station floor. She looked at Ryan and Blake for a long moment before speaking. "I spent my whole life teaching children at church that bitterness spreads faster than kindness," she said gently. Ryan lowered his eyes. Evelyn continued, "What you did to me was wrong. But if pain is the only thing people learn from, then this city will never change." Marcus watched his mother carefully. The federal agents exchanged quiet looks between themselves. Even Bennett seemed surprised. Evelyn placed the envelope gently on the desk beside the surrendered badges. "Use it for somebody else's child?" she said softly. Blake stared at her in disbelief. "After everything?" Evelyn looked at him calmly. "You thought because I was old, black, and poor, nobody important would care what happened to me." Her voice never rose above a whisper. "But the truth is, every person matters to somebody." Ryan's face tightened sharply then, not with anger anymore, but something closer to shame. Marcus remained silent beside his mother, his broad frame still carrying the weight of restrained power, yet the coldness in his eyes had faded slightly now. Bennett exhaled deeply and nodded once toward the agents. "Escort these officers downstairs." Ryan hesitated before turning toward Evelyn. His lips parted slightly, struggling for words. Finally, barely audible beneath the hum of the station lights, he said, "I am sorry." Evelyn simply nodded once. No triumph. No cruelty. Just quiet acknowledgement. Outside, the rain had finally begun to slow. By late afternoon, the storm had finally passed over Chicago, leaving the streets washed clean beneath pale winter sunlight that reflected softly off puddles along the sidewalks. St. Mary's Children's Hospital stood quiet beneath the gray sky, its tall glass windows glowing warm against the cold outside air. Inside room 314, Kayla Carter sat propped up in bed wearing fuzzy purple socks while carefully coloring inside a book spread across her lap. The steady beep of nearby monitors blended gently with distant footsteps rolling through the hallway. Evelyn sat beside the bed knitting slowly beneath the soft yellow light, her glasses resting low on her nose while the familiar click of knitting needles filled the room with calm. For the first time in days, her hands no longer trembled. Marcus stood near the window in silence, one hand resting inside the pocket of his charcoal coat as he looked down at the city below. Helicopters moved like tiny shadows beyond the skyline. Traffic crawled through afternoon streets. Somewhere far away, meetings were still being delayed because of him. Calls still waited unanswered. Problems still demanded solutions only he could provide. Yet none of that seemed to matter inside this small hospital room. Kayla suddenly looked up from her coloring book. "Uncle Marcus?" His expression softened immediately. "Yes, sweetheart. Grandma said you used to be scary." Evelyn looked up sharply over her glasses. "Kayla." But the little girl giggled quietly beneath the blanket. Marcus let out the faintest breath of amusement before walking slowly toward the bed. "Did she now?" Kayla nodded seriously. "She said bad people were afraid of you." Marcus pulled a chair closer and sat beside her. Sunlight brushed softly across the silver streak beginning near his temple, making him look older than he had that morning inside the police station. "Tired, too." "Sometimes," he said carefully. "People become hard because the world teaches them to expect the worst." Kayla considered this while turning her crayon slowly between her fingers. "Are you still hard?" Marcus glanced toward Evelyn. She watched him quietly, her knitting resting motionless in her lap now. After a long moment, Marcus shook his head slightly. "Not when I am with family." The little girl smiled at that before holding up her drawing proudly. It showed 3 people standing beneath a giant yellow sun. One small girl in the middle holding hands with her grandmother and a tall man in a dark coat beside them. Above their heads, she had written in crooked purple letters, "Safe." Marcus stared at the drawing longer than expected. Something behind his eyes shifted then. Something quieter than power. Evelyn reached over and gently touched his arm. "You did good today, baby," she said softly. Marcus looked down at the picture again. "I almost did not." Evelyn shook her head. "No, you protected us." Her voice remained calm and warm, like church music on an early Sunday morning. "But you also listened." Outside the hospital room, evening sunlight stretched gold across the hallway floors while nurses pushed carts quietly past open doors. The city kept moving. Somewhere downtown, 2 former officers were answering difficult questions beneath cold fluorescent lights. Somewhere else, young Officer Ruiz sat alone in his patrol car thinking about the kind of policeman he still wanted to become. But inside room 314, none of that noise entered. Marcus leaned back slowly in his chair while Kayla rested her head against his arm, already growing sleepy beneath the blanket. Evelyn resumed knitting beside them with slow, steady hands. The room smelled faintly of soup, crayons, and clean linen. And as sunlight faded gently across the windows of St. Mary's, the most feared man in countless rooms sat completely still beside the people he loved most, no longer looking dangerous at all.